Welcome to They Live by Film, a platform dedicated to bringing you film discussion and interviews from around the world. I am Adam Lundy, and I am joined by my co-hosts Chris Haskell and Zach Bryant.
I'm
Hey,
I'm going by Giacomo today.
Oh God. Okay.
Hey y'all.
How are we all doing?
I am tired. I just got in from the train 9 hours ago, so I'm very tired.
How long was this train ride, by the way?
7.5 hours.
Holy moly, what are you in Europe?
No, if I was in Europe, I could go to like 14 different countries. I just moved 2 states. Well, I guess we went through Delaware, so 3 states. So we went through the rest of Pennsylvania, we went through Maryland, Delaware, and then Virginia. But yeah, I was the end of the lines, which was nice. So you don't have to worry about falling asleep because they'll definitely kick you off on the last stop.
That's crazy. Well, I my favorite story is that you watched this movie we're going to talk about today on a train.
I watched both of them on a train, but the
Oh,
first one was a lot more appropriate.
yes. Yes, it is.
There was like one little scene in the first one that I was like, is there anyone around? And I was like, could they see it even if they weren't if they unless they were paying attention? But I still like scrolled down every time I had to scroll down to the comments.
Oh boy.
Fabulous. Before we get
Adam, how
into
are you?
our, yeah, I'm fabulous. I cannot complain. Everything is right in the world. Yeah.
And you're sleeping?
Oh no, of course not.
Okay, okay.
That's why everything is right in the world because I'm in that stage now where I'm so tired that nothing else could go wrong.
Got you.
You start researching like what is the longest someone's ever stayed awake? So you start
Yeah.
googling that.
I'm doing like math now because I started a new role in work and I have like a lot more flexibility in my hours. So I can kind of start anytime between 6 a.m. and 10 a.m. As long as I get the work done, I can start anytime between those hours, which is great to have that kind of flexibility. Um, but the demon inside of me wants to finish as early as possible. So I've been starting work at 6 a.m.
I'd be the same way.
So means getting
Absolutely.
up. Now, look, I'm lucky because I don't have a commute. I work from home. So I'm getting up at like 5:30, to have a shower, have some breakfast, whatever beforehand. But I'm still getting up at 5:30. And obviously the NFL kicks off tonight. And I'm like doing mental math in my head going, how late can I stay up for these games
What time?
before
Who's the Raiders playing?
the Raiders are playing the Chargers in SoFi? It kicks off at 25 past nine. So I'm thinking I could probably push to the third quarter
Yeah,
before I get to the point where I kind of have to go to bed. If I was an absolute demon, I could stay up. And if the Raiders are winning or if it's a close game, it's possible I'll stay up
I would
and
just
just
say
start
like, please be
later.
a blowout. You're like, I don't care which side, just be a blowout.
Yeah, exactly. Like if Gardner Minshew just wants to like absolutely do in his ACL and then Aiden McConnell comes on and then also does in his ACL and then we have to put Nate Peterman in, then I'll go to bed. That's
You know
fine.
what? It would be, it'd be like the most depressing thing ever, though. Like the Raiders are down by like 30 points. Fourth quarter, you're like, I'm going to bed. And then you wake up, it's like craziest comeback in history. That'll never
Yeah,
happen again.
it's like that Super Bowl, the 28-3. It's like that.
Hey,
That
I'm
would.
glad I stayed up for that. I was
Oh, so did I.
everybody else was like, "Oh, this game's over." I was like, "I don't think it is." Like I kept sitting there the whole time, like, "I don't think this game's over." Like I didn't
I
think they were
had,
going to win, but I was like, "This is going to end close."
yeah, that game happened back when I was like a single man, and I used to invite my friends over to like watch the Super Bowl, and they had like just they don't watch football normally. I just, we just invite over, we have a few beers, have some snacks, stay up and watch the game, blah blah blah. Um, and that year, like everyone was like glued to the screen. They had no idea what was happening. They don't follow football. They know the basic rules, so I didn't have to explain, what downs are or whatever. They know the basic rules, but they don't watch football normally, and they were just like glued to the screen. This is like the greatest comeback in history. And I fucking hate the Patriots. But even I was like, this is the craziest like, comeback ever.
It's because everyone
So
feels so lukewarm about the Falcons. Like it's like, yeah, I don't like the Patriots or Tom Brady, but this is way cooler than the Falcons winning a blowout.
Uh, and away from football, has anyone watched anything that they want to give a shout out to before we get into our feature presentations?
Sure, I can go real quick. So I am attempting to watch 500 movies this year. I didn't actually think
Jeez.
I'd be on pace by this point, but I am. I'm at 352 movies, so I've been watching quite a bit this year. One I did really want to shout out is while I was in Philadelphia, I did go see Bram Stoker's Dracula that was showing at like 9:45 at night. That movie looks so good on the big screen. Like it is a beautiful movie. It's so campy, but I honestly that was really helpful, like in the theater because it was packed. So I felt like it was much more enjoyable that way than any other way you could watch it.
Is that a Coppola movie?
Yeah, yeah, he
Okay.
made it in '92.
Okay. That's cool.
It has like one of Keanu's best acting performances, of course.
And the only time Kirsten Dunst acted well outside of Melancholia, right?
You're thinking of Interview with the Vampire.
I think that's
Oh
a
yeah,
hot
yeah.
take. Yeah,
She
even
doesn't
if
play a vampire for 2 more years.
Fair
And
enough.
whoa, are we saying that Mary Jane is not is she doesn't do great as Mary Jane? Because I will fight on that. She's
yeah,
amazing.
I think she's great as Mary Jane.
Well,
Yeah.
I think
fair
that's
enough. Yeah, she does her comic book.
I
She's a
forgot you had this thing against Mary, against Kirsten Dunst.
oh
I
yeah,
completely forgot.
oh yeah.
I think I blocked it out from when we talked about this last
it's
time.
such a random one to hate on. Like Kirsten Dunst is so like uncontroversial to everyone else on Earth.
It's
Yeah,
like
because she can't act. That's why she's just there on screen.
wild.
Just a
Beyond
wild stat before you continue. You've watched more films this year than I have this year and last year combined.
really.
Yeah.
Wow. What about you, Chris? Where are you at numbers wise?
No, I'm down this year. I'm gonna push according to my yeah, because I put a number on each one when I write about them. So I'm in the 150s right now. I'll get to 200 by the year end for sure, but I want to hit 300 this year. So I'm down quite a bit. Um, looking back now, I don't know how I did 300 a year with this job. I guess I didn't do my job well the first 2 years.
Like, oh, I could just sit here and watch a movie. It's fine.
Yeah, I would like to get 500 at one point. I don't know why that number's important to me, but I think it'd be kind of fun. And then when I retire, I'd like to get to 1,000 one year, which if you're retired is very doable.
I mean, you'd be watching like on average almost 3 movies a day.
Yeah, 2.5 movies a day.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I
totally
think
do.
that's so doable.
Yeah,
Because
do it on
there's
like a
some
leap
days
year,
where you
get
could
that one extra
watch,
day.
and there's some days you could like easily watch 4 movies. If you pick like
God,
four 90-minute movies, you could easily digest that in a day.
that's the thing. I mean, it'd be like since we're not paid to watch movies, it would be like one year I would try it and just see, just have it on my
What you do is you go pick up those who does the line of like noir, but is it Kino that does like all
oh,
those
they have like
noir box
Kino,
27.
sets?
everybody does a noir box set now. It's like four
But like
companies.
Kino does one, I think it's Kino or someone does ones where they're like on like volume fucking
Yeah.
57
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
and it's
Yeah,
like
yeah, yeah.
4 movies per pack. Just like buy all of those because they're all going to be like 80 minutes each probably.
It's so
Uh,
true.
and you could get through that pretty quick.
No, it's so true. Speaking of sets and watching a lot from one label, I've been obviously watching a lot of Vinegar Syndrome now. So most of my watching is going to be around either Vinegar Syndrome, Mondo Macabro, Deaf Crocodile, or stuff for the film club. That's pretty much. I barely have time just to do that. Um, so that's almost all of my watching. But we've talked about Vinegar Syndrome before on here, but between them and the partner labels, it's just it's so much what's the word? Whiplash of like I mean, because I was watching there's a Visconti movie that one of the partner labels put out called La Innocente. To go from a Visconti movie to an SOV movie called Blood Cult about a guy bashing a head. He decapitates somebody with the head and then uses that head to kill another person and bash them to death. And just the whiplash going between those two movies back to back is incredible. So I'm becoming I feel like the elasticity of like what I can enjoy is increasing through this experiment.
Yeah, my watching is kind of mostly dictated by Radiance stuff as well, for obviously similar reasons. Which we'll plug right now. If you somehow missed out, me and Chris now have different podcasts. I do the Radiance Film podcast, Chris does Punk Vacation and the Mondo Macabro podcast. I'll link everything in the description. But yeah, a lot of my watching is dominated by Radiance, but there's two things I watched recently that are Zach Bryant influenced. Zach Bryant influenced my
Oh no.
some of my watching. I watched Long Legs. I did it, guys. Finally
Yes,
saw Long
finally.
Legs.
I need to see it now. You liked it,
It was fucking awful. Oh my God. No, am I joking? No,
right?
I was
no, it
like,
was good.
I don't understand your rating system all the time, so maybe that's true.
No, it was good. I really liked it. I need to find time to watch it again because I didn't want spoilers. I like turned off all I like unfollowed Neon and everything like that because they were just retweeting stuff constantly when it came out. Um, but because of that, I knew like pretty much nothing about the movie. So I expected something more in line of like Zodiac or Seven. I wasn't expecting it to lean into the occult stuff as much, so that kind of
Mm.
threw me a little bit. No, I still liked it, but I feel like I need to rewatch it now that I kind of know what to expect.
Yeah,
I
because
feel like I'll like it even more the second time, knowing what I'm getting into.
I don't think it's a necessity, but I do think you get like a little bit more answers if you like get into like the ARG stuff. Like that website's still up, you can still like play with it and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Um, just because there's like little details when I was reading through, I'm like, oh, that, and they don't just like hand out like, did you pay attention to this in the movie? It's like, hey, here's some more informational murder scenes, and you start piecing together yourself, like, hey, those things are similar, those things are in common. So it's pretty cool. Yeah, I think I've seen it 3 times now, and I think I've gotten something more out of it every time I've watched it.
Nice. Yeah, I'm definitely gonna try and get it back on again at some point. And then the other Zach Bryant influenced watch was The Girl Who Knew Too Much. Um, we talked about this briefly when we were recording our Vault episode for the Radiance podcast as we were
Yes.
Yeah,
talking about Mario Bava. And
yeah,
you had recommended I check out that film, The Girl Who Knew Too Much.
cool.
And I did. I thought it was pretty good. I didn't think it was like as good as Blood and Black Lace, but obviously this was earlier than that. But if you put this film and Blood and Black Lace together, it's just like the Giallo film.
Yeah.
It's like the prototype Giallo film.
Right.
Stranger in Italy witnesses a murder that she can't quite understand how it happened, and other killings are taking place, and she has to try and piece it together with this weird dude. It's like every Giallo film. Um, so yeah, I didn't think it was like amazing or great or anything, but I thought it was pretty good. I didn't expect to see John Saxon in it.
I forgot John Saxon was in it. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, he's like the main guy. He's like
What a
the guy who was
legend.
helping the main character figure it all out. So that was random. It was interesting. I don't think I've seen anything else that I kind of want to shout out, to be honest. Like I said, everything else has been Radiance related that I'll be talking about on the next Radiance episode. Oh, I saw Beetlejuice for the first time, and I thought I was I was underwhelmed. I don't, what do people why do people like Beetlejuice?
The original?
Yeah, why do people like it?
Do you like other Tim Burton movies, or are you
Yeah,
kind of
Fuck
lukewarm?
no.
yeah.
Okay, and I mean I think that's kind of a necessity. Like I'm a little bit mixed on him, but I do remember liking Beetlejuice, so I have not seen it since I was a kid.
Yeah.
Dude, that
See, I
movie
hate Tim
has
Burton because every wannabe goth chick that I hung out with as a teenager loved him, so I hate him because of that.
that movie has so much nostalgia for me. I forget what year it came out, but I
88.
okay. So I probably saw it when I was like 7 then, because I probably didn't see it in theaters, but whenever it started playing on TV, so 7, 8, 9, I was watching it. I probably saw that movie 20 times before I was a teenager. I used to be able to quote that whole movie. But like, I'm mixed on Tim Burton overall. But like Edward Scissorhands, Beetlejuice, he's made some ones that I love. That's one
I
of
mean,
them.
his career pretty much went down the tank after Sweeney Todd, so at least he, that's pretty much where I tell people to end. Like,
I,
go to
I
Sweeney
like
Todd.
I like Big Fish.
Big Fish is
Yeah,
good from what I remember. That's another one I haven't seen since I was a kid.
Yeah,
yeah.
same. But I like that one. To the point where like because it's not overtly Burton-y either. So like for a long time I didn't even realize that it was Tim Burton that made it because I'd seen it when I was a kid and I didn't like know who Tim Burton was.
Yeah,
Um
yeah.
but yeah.
Sweet Todd was a lot of fun actually. I like that one a lot.
And then when you're
Um,
a teenager, you're like, oh yeah, Tim Burton made A Nightmare Before Christmas.
Oh, I fucking hate those people. Justice for Henry Selick.
He's a good director. Like Coraline's fantastic.
Coraline is so good. Yeah, that's a great film.
Um,
Justice for Henry.
yeah.
Anyway, that's about it for me, really. Yeah, I'm looking through my watch list. Everything else has been Radiance related or this. Oh, I saw Revenge of the Blood Beast slash the She Beast. One of the
oh, what's it?
Raro releases. Yeah, I
But you
watched it.
So it's a top 100 film for you. Got it. Understand.
Look, it is what it is. It's a cheap piece of crap, but like it's good in its own way. You know what I mean. It's just Euro trash. But it's good in its own way.
the is that isn't that an AGFA release here in the US?
I have no idea. I
Probably. It
have it
sounds like an
from
AGFA release.
it's one of the Raro UK, one of the partner with Radiance, the Raro UK have it out
Oh,
there.
okay, okay, okay,
So I just assumed it was Raro in the States as well, but I don't know.
okay. Um, anyways, that's fun. Yeah. No, I don't have to. I mean, the only thing I just want to just very briefly call out before we jump in, since we're going to be talking about two stone cold classics today, um, is Cairo Station is a very good movie. Um, holy cow. Like I don't know if y'all had the exact same experience, but when I was in college, this is a while ago now, but I had just like this group of nerds and we all would like watch movies together and we would just like talk about them forever afterwards and try to piece them together. And Cairo Station kind of brought me back to like that era of a movie that I just wanted to talk about a lot after I saw it. There's just so many like so many layers in that to discuss and like so much going on. I don't know. I thought it was such a cool movie.
Yeah,
I
I
thought you were
didn't
going to tell.
rewatch it for the club. I'd seen it a few years ago, and I saw it on the most random place. So if you're thinking of like where to find, independent Egyptian realism movies, like where does your mind go to try and find that stuff?
Criterion Channel, I
Criterion
guess.
Channel, yeah,
Tubi. Tubi would
Tubi,
have some bullshit like that.
yeah. No, I saw it on Netflix.
Oh. Oh,
Nice.
that's because like everyone but the US Netflix actually like gets different stuff.
It gets
The
different
US
stuff, but it
Netflix is
doesn't get,
terrible.
but it doesn't get that.
Yeah. That's true.
UK and
Yeah.
Ireland Netflix doesn't get that. I came across it just randomly on Netflix, and I was like, I've heard of this because it was mentioned in the story of film, so I'd heard of it
Okay.
because of that. I'd known about it because it's mentioned in the story of film, the Mark Cousins book. And I was like, is this the right film? I was like, this is the director. Whoa, why is this on Netflix? And I watched it. And I thought it was good. I didn't blow me away like it sounds like it did for you, Chris, but I thought it was good. It's definitely an interesting movie. I should probably rewatch it at some point. It's been about 4 years, I'd say, since I watched it.
No, I don't know if I'm gonna say it's like the best movie I saw this year or anything, but it's just like to think about that movie coming out in late 50s Egypt sort of challenges a lot of what I would assume would be
Oh
okay.
yeah, for sure it does. Yeah, yeah. That kind of like it does like touch on like sexuality and outsiderism and stuff like stuff you wouldn't really typically associate with sort of like religiously rigid societies.
Exactly. Yeah. 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 So it was just a fascinating thing to talk about. But all right, let's do it.
Speaking of other fascinating things to talk about, uh yeah, where do we want to start here?
Should we start on the one that is going to be universally beloved? So Casanova? Or do you want to start on the classic and then get to the controversy?
Yeah, I think we'll go classic and controversy. I think that'll be okay. Um So the context of this episode, I guess, to explain to listeners what we're doing here. Um, this is Zach's week, but Zach didn't choose the movies. He basically said to me and Chris, you guys love these directors. I want you to pick a film by these filmmakers that you think that I like that I've never seen before. And it was easy because I don't think he'd ever seen a Fellini film, and he'd only seen a handful of Bergman films that I had
This was my
recommended.
fifth Bergman.
Okay, well, you
Yeah.
saw a lot more than I thought you'd only seen two or three. So you saw one extra than I thought you did.
Let's see.
Um,
I've seen Wild Strawberries was my first,
Hmm.
which I think we have an episode really early where we talk about Wild Strawberries. I'm pretty
Yeah.
sure we did that one
Maybe.
here.
Yeah.
I've seen Virgin Spring.
Hmm.
I've seen Hour of the Wolf, and
Hmm.
I've seen Persona, which I also think we did an
Okay.
episode on Persona on here.
Yep.
Possibly.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is your fifth, and they're all, I think in terms of quality, these are all fairly similar. So yeah, the film that I chose for Zach is the Ingmar Bergman film Through a Glass Darkly, which is from 1961. Um, in Swedish, it's Se som i en spegel. My Swedish is not very good. To read you the letterboxed blurb. Karen, so it's not Karen, it's Karen. Karen hopes to recover from her recent stay at a mental hospital by spending the summer at her family's cottage on a tiny island. Her husband, Martin, cares for her but is frustrated by her physical withdrawal. Her younger brother, Minus, is confused by Karen's vulnerability and his own budding sexuality. Their father, David, cannot overcome his haughty remoteness. Beset by visions, Karen descends further into madness. Um, I'm gonna guess this film is top 250 on They Shoot Pictures.
Okay.
That's my guess.
Okay.
I'm gonna
Are
guess
we
it's too low. I'm gonna guess it's way too low, like in the 700s.
okay?
Hit us.
So you're talking about Through a Glass Darkly from Ingmar Bergman in 1961,
Correct, sir.
a film that is currently 1,673.
Fuck off.
It's currently right below Shampoo from Hal Ashby
Oh my God.
I don't even know
and
what that is.
right above 12 Monkeys from Terry Gilliam.
Oh my fucking God.
No, that one's fair, but that one should be higher too.
It's a little bit worse than Ghost World from Terry Zwigoff.
Oh my fucking God.
So, okay, I don't know. I can't remember on They Shoot Pictures if you can do like figure out like just do the Bergman stuff. Can you do that and see where like it ranks as like
Yeah, you can just type in his
Yeah,
name. Yeah, filter it.
yeah. Here you go. I got you.
I'm just curious like where it
So,
ranks with his stuff.
okay, so Persona's the top ranked one at
That makes
16.
sense.
It's fair.
Wild Strawberries is number 61.
Why?
Wow, that's way too high.
Yeah, that movie's okay.
Literally one below that is Fanny and Alexander at 62.
I have no comment.
I haven't seen that one either.
Seventh Seal is 82. So he has
I haven't
four
seen it.
movies in the top 100.
I like Seventh Seal. I think you'd like Seventh Seal as well, Zach, if you're looking for another direction to go. It's
Absolutely.
very different. It's medieval, but I think you'll vibe with it.
Okay.
Absolutely. It's great. Cries and Whispers is next at 163,
That film is dope.
which that's probably I don't know. That's my top three. I don't know. I was about to say it's my favorite, but it's top three. That's the one
It's
that's
too hard to watch for me to be a top one, but it's good.
it's all red. That's the all red one, right?
Yeah,
My number
exactly.
one has not been listed yet, so
Scenes from a Marriage is next at 431.
That's really good too.
Yeah. Winter Light is next at 435.
never even heard of that.
I would have that one below. It's part of the trilogy of the
Yeah.
True Glass Darkly. I would definitely have it lower though. I get why people love it though.
I that is my favorite of the trilogy. But anyways, it's okay.
Wow.
Then The Silence is next at 583.
So this one's ranked third in the that's crazy.
Yeah.
I would have it the opposite way.
Hour of the Wolf is next at 635.
I like Hour of the Wolf.
Yeah, Howard the Wolf's good.
Virgin Spring is next at 657.
There we go.
There's a
Still too
lot
low.
of Bergman movies in the top 1000. Smiles of a Summer Night is next at 831.
Jesus.
Shame is next at 851.
Shame is great. That's probably my favorite.
Yeah, Shame should be higher on the list. Shame is really good. Um, Sawdust and Tinsel is next. That's the first one I disagree with on the list.
That one's
You
pretty
haven't
good.
seen that, right, Adam? I feel like I remember that being on your list.
I'm pretty sure Sawdust and Tinsel is the one oh no, maybe I haven't seen it. I don't remember. I've seen so many fucking Bergman films and they all have similar names.
I think 952 is too high. I think that one should be lower. Then Summer with Monica, still in the top 1000, 966. Now, after that, we're breaking out of the top 1000. Autumn Sonata, Saraband, and then
Wow.
Darkly.
Autumn Sonata is so low as well. That film's great.
Yeah. So this is the top, and according to They Shoot Pictures, this is, a top 15 Bergman movie.
You know what I'm going to chalk this up to? I'm going to chalk this up to the fact that Bergman has so many films of equal quality that they're all kind of splitting the votes on one another.
Yeah.
That's what I'm going to chalk
It's
this
the only way
down
I can
to.
imagine Wild Strawberries is in the top. What, 61?
Yeah.
That's wild.
But what the only thing I'll say is that like when I first got into Bergman in uh, well, it doesn't matter when, just when I first got into Bergman, I Wild Strawberries was my favorite for a few years because it's fairly short and contained, and there's like a lot of interesting stuff going on around religion, and it's like kind of the reason I think a lot of people get into Bergman is for this like skepticism and cynicism of like religion, but like we're gonna get into this here in a minute, but like he comes from his dad was the priest or the whatever to the Queen of Sweden. So like he knows religion very well, right? So it's just like he has this interesting perspective whenever he talks about it. So Wild Strawberries for me was my favorite for a while. I
I'd
just
just rather watch Muppets Christmas Carol.
the Bergman's Muppets Christmas Carol.
Just Muppets Christmas Carol. Same story, same
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah, that's true. Then Wild Strawberries.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's true. It is very similar to Christmas Carol. You're right. But yeah, 1673. I was actually really surprised this was so low.
yeah. I actually thought Seven Seal would have been first just because of how much I've heard about it.
No,
But I guess
it's
Persona makes sense too. Persona's really good.
I Persona for me is like another one that I like. I think is okay, but that goes into my Vertigo category of movies I think that are overrated.
You're a fucking menace to society.
Hey, I'm with you. I love Bergman, but I thought
If you
Persona.
hate Thelma and Louise, I'm just going to assume you hate like borderline lesbian stories.
That's, I'm gonna have to look out for Chris's review of Thelma and Louise next week to see if we need to cancel him. Um, right, okay. So I suppose this was the one I picked. So let me just kind of give a verdict on. First of all, the reason I chose it was I know that Zach has liked the Bergman films that have leaned into more horror elements. Like he only really has two out and out horror films. That's Hour of the Wolf and Divergent Spring. But he has a lot of films that I feel dabble in horror and dabble in nightmarish imagery and sort of ideas that kind of touch on horror themes. Um, and he's already seen a couple. He's already seen Persona, so that's the most obvious kind of next one. And then there was a few others that I was kind of deciding on, and it came down to Shame and Through a Glass Darkly, because I think they both do push on ideas of horrible things, and not necessarily horror strictly, but they touch on themes that you will often then see in horror films. And I decided to go with Through a Glass Darkly because I thought it did that a little bit more overtly. Um, I think this film is a masterpiece. I don't agree with the guys on They Shoot Pictures. I think this film's a masterpiece. In terms of its script, in terms of the characters and how they are portrayed, the actual acting in itself, the direction and the cinematography, which was done by Sven Nykvist, who's my favorite cinematographer ever. Sorry, Stanley Cortez. Um, Sven Nykvist is my number one. Um, and I just think that the ideas within this film, this kind of idea, and the portrayal of mental illness is just so powerful. Like this was like 1961, so 10 years prior in Hollywood we're talking about all the hokey stuff that we talked about during the Fritz Lang episode
Right.
with mental illness, and then here over in Sweden we have a really raw and realistic depiction of like schizophrenia. It's never actually mentioned what the illness is. They always just talk about this kind of deadly ailment that she has, but it's I think it's pretty obvious it's some kind of like paranoid schizophrenia
Right.
or psychosis, something like that. Um, and it's such a raw depiction of the there's something like there's something about the portrayal that's so genuine because it's not done for dramatic flair. It's not done to almost kind of romanticize mental illness, which so many films almost do. There's there's a manicness in the performance. The way she kind of goes between her episodes are just so natural. Um, it's a really powerful film to watch. Um, like one could argue about, so I just want to kind of word this in the best way. There's a lot of times with films where people are like seeing visions or hearing voices and what have you, and the film almost tries to say, "Oh, well, what if they were seeing visions? What if this was true?" And then it kind of leans into the ambiguity about whether or not they are crazy, you know? Whereas this film doesn't do that. That the ending scene kind of puts a stamp on that. It kind of shows you behind the curtain to show why she thinks she's seeing these visions. Um, and I'm getting kind of around the track here, but I just think this film does a really great job at portraying mental illness in a way that's incredibly powerful. It doesn't romanticize it. It doesn't try and play with the audience to say, "Oh, well, what if the visions were true," like some other films try to do. It's just no, this woman is deeply, deeply unwell, and this is the fallout that it's having on her family, who have their own dysfunction. They're not perfect people, which a lot of people in these kind of films, the family end up all being saints, but the whole family has their own dysfunction. Each member of the family has their own issues, and the knock-on effect that kind of has throughout the family as well. I've waffled there, but yeah, that's why I love this film a lot. Because yeah,
Well, there's like this matter of factness to it, right? Like it's
yeah,
something I've noticed. Like you can correct me if I'm wrong because I've such a limited knowledge with Bergman. I've noticed a lot where he doesn't seem to have as much interest in putting you necessarily in the shoes of the character than just showing you like what the characters are doing. And I noticed that a lot more here, where I don't feel like I'm necessarily in the perspective of any of these characters. I'm just almost like another family member there just watching it, if that makes
that's
sense.
that is a great observation, and it does make sense because Bergman is a big theater guy. Um, this film was started life as a play,
Oh,
that he
okay, that
was
makes
writing, and
sense.
then he turned it into a film. And a lot of the films he made, especially, so this film was the first film made on Faroe Island. And he would go on to make many films on this island, in this kind of what they would call chamber pieces. Very small cast, usually one or two locations. And it was essentially like a play on screen. So that observation there, where you are almost like the observer rather than getting an actual peek into someone's mind or going into their shoes or what have you. That's yeah, that makes absolute sense just because of the nature of how Bergman was making these movies.
Well, and when you talk about mental illness, it's all it's interesting, and there's no wrong way. There are wrong ways, but it's not wrong to necessarily show the perspective of what the person who's going through the mental illness sees, because there's a sense of like empathy with that. But I think what I like here is where you don't get that peek behind the curtain. You don't get to see there. You get to experience, kind of feeling helpless. Like that. I think that's a common thing with people who are dealing with like
Yeah.
serious mental illness is that you're helpless to really do anything about it. They're almost not even there in a sense.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, um, I don't know exactly why Bergman chose this particular, schizophrenia or whatever you want to call it for the film. But, this movie was the original, so the title Through a Glass Darkly is actually from the Bible, right? That's like a passage from the Christian Bible.
Mhm.
And the interesting thing is it's in the context. Do you know like one of the most commonly quoted things is in weddings is from Corinthians. I don't know if y'all I wouldn't typically call it a specific Bible verse, but it's the one, love is patient, love is kind, love does not envy or boast. It's the one that's at like most weddings, right?
Okay.
Right below that, it talks about love never ends. it will pass away, tongues will cease, knowledge will pass away. The all this stuff is going, all this stuff is going to pass away. For now, we see through a glass darkly. So it's saying like in the flesh, we see through the glass darkly. But then later we see face to face with love, and they're saying love is God, right? So, and then it says, now I know in part that I shall know fully, even as I have fully been known. So, anyways, the whole point of this verse is saying that God is love. And I think it's really interesting because this is brought up in the film too, right? And Bergman was rebelling against the church for his whole life. Maybe never went back to it. I can't remember. But he was not a fan of Christianity, but he knew it very intimately, right? And so I think the idea of taking a verse like that and putting it in the context of this really like dysfunctional family who seems like has generational sort of trauma in there and are working through how to love. It's just a very masterful piece of writing, I guess, is my long-winded way of saying that. Because he takes something that is for the Christian world very known and puts like his spin on it to make it almost like to kind of show like how messy it is to love as a human, right? And how messy it is to love as a family. And I think he does that v very well, if not one of the best in film history at least.
Yeah. And the messiness of the family dynamic is such a key sort of part of this film
Yeah.
because like every family is dysfunctional in some way or another. Every family has its quirks, every family has something, that gives it a little bit of dysfunction. There's no such thing as a nuclear family, where everyone is, like it is like in a 1940s American film, it's just not how it is.
Mhm.
Um, there's always some kind of dysfunction there. It is now, admittedly, this family is very dysfunctional. Um, because you have their dad who's a writer who seems to be completely incapable of love and affection. Um, you have the sexually frustrated brother, which to be fair, if he lives on his own on a tiny island, I kind of get where he's coming from.
Yeah.
Um, then you have, her, Karen's husband, played by Max von Sydow, who, very clearly loves her, but doesn't really understand. I think he more so loves the idea of her
Yeah.
because he doesn't really understand that she's not the person that he wants her to be.
That's right.
Well,
Um,
I do remember a line early on that was, she mentioned something. I can't remember the exact verbatim, but she can't be in both places, which I thought was just a really sad and tragic line. Like
Yeah.
it's almost like the hope of being normal is worse than just accepting that, she's sick. She almost like she'd
yeah.
rather be sick forever than have the hope that she'll be okay
Mm.
because it seems to bring her like so much stress.
The
Great point. Yeah, because they mentioned a few times that her illness is incurable, and
yeah.
And I mean, and like I said, we don't know if it's schizophrenia or not, but it definitely holds some things. There's a lot of religious element to a lot of schizophrenia, so that would make sense. And when you talk about like loving the idea of her, I mean, she's when she's not showing these symptoms, she does seem like a very charming person. She
yeah,
seems like she wants to be happy, but you also wonder how much of that is just an act to try to be normal. And some of it does seem like, you talk about with her husband. I feel like she needs this support and they just don't know how to give it to her. And so I think when to me, it almost seemed like she relapses when she doesn't have anywhere else to turn because they almost like they know stress can bring it on. So they try not to like talk to her about it. But then at the same time, her not talking about it is stressing her out.
well,
But
yeah, and that was the kind of catalyst to her biggest episode, where the second half of the film, she essentially spends the entire second half of the film in a manic kind of episode of psychosis.
Hmm.
And what triggers that is her finding her father's diary and
Hmm.
kind of reading that her father wants to write and kind of document her illness, which is such a bastard thing to do. Um, and that would, this kind of idea that not even her father can really, not even that her father can't help, but her father seemingly doesn't even want to help because he wants to document what's going on. And if you cure her, then there's nothing to document. Um, so that feeling of kind of like, obviously that's massively stressful, but also that's just going to turn you to, like, if your own father doesn't believe that you can be cured, then like what hope do you have left at that point?
And
This
then,
is
when she goes to her husband, I'm not going to sit here and say her husband, I wouldn't know how to handle that, in this
No.
situation. But I also feel like he was so mechanical. Like when she goes to like tell her about what she read, it's like, I need to like, his objective was to pull it out of her, what was said versus, you know, do being as supportive as he can. He did try, and I don't think he's, I like I said, I don't think that's an easy situation to be in, but I also can understand if somebody didn't feel supported in that way. Because a lot of what he does is after the fact when she's not there, like when he goes and talks to her dad and things like that, she's not going to necessarily see that support as much as she might need it.
But there's two things y'all are talking about I want to kind of touch on briefly. One is, I mean, are there like spoilers for this movie, or can we talk openly, or should we? I
I mean, I
mean,
think
Like,
you kind of know where it's going.
yeah, I specifically about the dad is an interesting character, right? Because we find out as the movie goes on, he's coming from a place of complete brokenness, and
mhm,
like, and he sees his daughter as too painful to be around because of what happened to his wife.
yeah,
And so like you kind of you end up sympathizing with the dad a bit because it's like, yeah, like she's got the worst of him, and he's a kind of a selfish person to begin with, and there's a lot of talk about his vanity and stuff that throughout the movie, so he has that. But he also has unresolved sadness from losing his wife to the same illness, whatever it is, right?
mhm,
So he just can't be around his daughter. It's like too stressful for him. So the way that he copes is to try to approach it more, through reason and curiosity and writing about it, almost as like I took it as almost like a defense mechanism. Um,
Yeah, that kind of reminds me like the line in Blair Witch Project when they're talking about why she's still recording. And I think it's one of the best explanations I've seen in like a found footage movie. The character starts talking about like, when you look through the camera, it's not real life. It's almost like writing about it could be a form of it's not real if I wrote about it,
yeah,
or I can deal with it if I just look at it through the lens of academia or of curiosity or whatever.
it's going back to that through a glass darkly, right? It's like looking through a dimly lit glass. It's like not quite clear what it is. It's going back to that same theme. The other thing that I kind of want to touch on is like this is the poison of religion. I think he does a good job of kind of bringing it in because this is the same discussion that's had in uh, a Dreyer movie as well. Oh shoot,
I know the one you're talking about.
it's called The Word, but I can't remember the Danish name. But
Ordet.
or Debt, thank you. Like this is the same discussion of like what if people are having religious what if what if these religious zealots are actually real? What if it's really happening? Would we be able to recognize it or not? I think Dreyer leans in the camp of there's a miracle, and I think Bergman leans in the camp of more science and saying, no, there's no, God's not speaking to her. She's losing her sanity, right? But it's a similar discussion kind of like throughout the movie. And I'm sure he would have grown up watching Dreyer. Um, so this feels to me almost like his sort of take on Ordet a little bit, of not a remake, obviously, but at least his sort of take on that discussion of how religion can be poisonous. Because if somebody was uh, hearing voices and seeing images of like mermaids and people flying on brooms, it's sort of easy to dismiss them as just being crazy. But when they say they're seeing God, it has that extra element of like, well, I don't know, like maybe, especially in the culture of the 50s or 60s of Sweden, you wouldn't be so quick to dismiss that.
Well, and that kind of adds on to a scene towards the end where
Yeah.
you have this moment where when you're dealing with somebody with mental illness that you don't want to. It can sometimes be a very negative thing to humor them with it, like to give any credence of weight to it.
Yeah.
Um, and it really reminded me of that when near the end when she's asking her husband to pray with her. He's having a moment of he wants to support her, and religion is a normal thing in most area in a lot of areas of the world. But at the same time, it's like, am I like causing more damage by doing that? By
Yeah.
giving like this sense of weight to it.
And what I love about that ending is like, and this is kind of ties into what I was saying earlier about the lack of ambiguity. Like Bergman tells us exactly why, well, like what Karen is experiencing, Bergman gives us a logical and real and tangible explanation for it. You know, Karen's been waiting for God to open and come through the door to speak with her. And the door opens, but we know why it's opened because we can see what else is going on in the scene. We
Mm-hmm.
know that it's not God opening the door because we know how it's open. I'm not going to get into two spoilers, but we understand why what's happening is happening from a logical, hard, scientific, earthbound reason. And that's what I love about this film because it it is it is better for its lack of ambiguity. Like I think of films like, and Zach's probably seen both of these, and they're good films, but like if you think of something like Frailty or Take Shelter,
Yeah.
which are films that both deal with people who seemingly have mental illnesses, but then there's ambiguity there about whether or not they are mental illnesses and whether they actually are, whether they do have some kind of divine connection. There's that ambiguity in both of those films. And I love that Bergman doesn't give us ambiguity here. She is just not well. It is as simple as that. There's nothing romantic about this. There's nothing ambiguous. There's nothing for the audience to kind of say, oh, well, maybe, she was right. Maybe God is gonna. No, it's she's unwell and she needs to be treated properly in order to try and give her some semblance of normalcy. Even if she can't be cured, she needs to have the proper treatment. And that's what I love about this film. It doesn't mess around with this stuff. It is a very hard look at life with a family member with severe mental illness. There is no, there is no ambiguity there that maybe, just maybe they're not crazy. No, she is mentally unwell, and it's as simple as that.
That's right. And
Yeah, and
that
I
was
you know I like that the film spends so much time. I think there's always this habit as a filmmaker to, how do I put it? You want to get to the meat of it as quickly as possible, which I understand. You have a limited time. This movie's what, an hour and a half. It's
right.
not very long, but he does spend a significant amount of time with her, showing her wellness. Now, there's always like that like underlying dread of where they talk about her illness and things like that, but she seems to have, try to have a good relationship, have like this good life where she has a good relationship with her brother, and they fight and stuff, but expected for siblings. And she seems to care about her dad and her husband and things like that. But he gives a lot of time to that.
Yeah. I mean, without going too deep into this, I think I mentioned this before in chat, but there's a lot of mental illness in my family on my mom's side. And I think, you know, uh, we haven't dealt with schizophrenia, which looking back, I thought we had the whole DSM covered, but I guess we're missing a few. Um, and this one, the the scenes where she's in what would be considered like a manic state, I think are portrayed very well because we hear the word manic and we put like a negative spin to it, but typically people that are in a manic state can present as very positive and optimistic and like life is good, and it's almost like a desire to show that they're I mean, I hate to use the word normal, but to show that there's nothing wrong with them, right? And I mean, I have relatives who will just call and leave like a 6 minute voicemail, and it's just all over the place. And it's just there's like I think the one of the things that Harriet Anderson does well, which I want to get to this question for you, Adam, in a second, of who's your favorite lead actress from Bergman's filmography. I think for me, Harriet Anderson might be up there, if not the best. But I think one of the things she does so well is she never overplays the parts where she's lucid, um, but she also never overplays the parts where she's in her head and struggling with visions and all those things. She kind of plays them. She like I believe that she's experiencing both. I never believe she's acting. Let me put it that way. And that's I don't know how she pulled that off unless she knew people that were dealing with this.
Yeah, the lead performance is amazing. And to answer your question, Harry Anderson is very unlucky because she's unlucky by the fact that Liv Ullmann exists.
Yeah,
Sim
yeah, that's what I was gonna think. I mean,
Simple as that, really.
Liv
Liv
Ullman's
Ullmann is
sort of the
amazing.
right
She's probably my
answer.
favorite. Like Liv Ullmann is probably my favorite actress ever. Like regardless of even Bergman stuff,
Sure.
Liv
Yeah.
Ullmann is probably my favorite actress ever. She's phenomenal.
Well, I mean, I don't want to go too far off on this tangent, but he makes if you're ever curious if theater people can transfer over to film, he's like the perfect example of how it works, right?
Oh yeah, absolutely. One thing I will say, just talking about like favorite leads, because obviously Zach might have picked up on this by now after watching a few films. He uses the same actors a lot.
Oh yes,
Um,
yes.
so like Harriet Anderson, Liv Ullmann, and BB Anderson would be like the main female actors he would use, and then Max von Sydow, Gunnar Bjornstrand, who plays the dad in this film, and Erland Josephson would be like the main kind of the actors that he would use in a lot of his films. And Gunnar Bjornstrand is probably my favorite male actor in Bergman. I know everyone loves Max von Sydow, and so do I. Um, but there's something I love about Gunnar Bjornstrand, just the way he plays stoicism very well. Um, I always like when he shows up in Bergman films.
And this is a slight tangent, but Chris, I didn't know this, so I was just looking up. Harriet Anderson is in Dogville.
Yeah, that's right. She plays I forgot about that. You're right.
It's
She plays
Gloria. Yeah, I just looked it up. I was like, oh wow, I have seen her in something else.
That's right. I totally forgot about that. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Um she kept acting her whole career. That's right. Um but yeah, I don't know who my favorite male actor is from Bergman. That's tough. Um the thing that Gunnar Bjornstad does well is I think he does like subtle emotions probably the best in that crew. Like
Mhm.
he can convey a lot of different things just with his face, and just like with small movements of his face. You know exactly how he's feeling at any given moment, even if he's not doing much, which I think is a powerful, like it's an underappreciated form of acting. I don't know if it's underappreciated, but it makes for really good performances.
Well, I think if you look at the three main ones um, as a spectrum, I think that's the best way to kind of look at. So Maxim von Sydow is obviously very theatrical
Yeah,
in his acting. He
right.
plays a lot of roles very well because of his how theatrical he is. Erland Josephson is more of the everyman when he shows up in Bergman films. He's just more of like the everyman kind of you can put yourself in his shoes.
Right.
And then I think Gunnar Bjornstrand kind of sits between the middle, where he's not very flamboyant in his acting, but he's also so stony and hard. It's hard for you to imagine yourself as him. So he kind of sits in somewhere in between for me,
Yeah, yeah. I think that's a
which
pretty.
makes him very flexible, I think, in the types of roles that he can play and the types of films that he can be in. I think he has a lot of flexibility. Um, well, one thing that I wanted to kind of ask you guys about, because I only kind of picked up on it this time when I was watching it, that I don't know, it kind of verges a little bit into spoiler territory, a little bit. But I picked up a bit on what seemed to be a theme of um, generational sexual trauma, which is a bit of a heavy subject. So, we don't have to dwell on it too long. It was just something I picked up based on the on what happens in the final scene. So. again, this is spoiler territory, guys. So if you haven't, if you want to watch this, if you're listening and you haven't seen it yet and you want to go in completely blind, maybe skip ahead a few minutes. But, obviously the one of the big breaking points in this movie and the thing that kind of momentarily breaks Karen out of her psychosis is this kind of incestuous interaction that she has with Minus
Right.
during the storm on the boat. Um, which is not shown in any way explicitly or anything like that. It's very tastefully done in that regard. This is not an exploitation film or anything. It's not. We're not watching. What are those films, Chris? That you like? Taboo? Is that what they're called?
Oh, this,
We're not.
yeah.
It's not. It's not a taboo movie. It's done very. It's taken very seriously and it's not shown explicitly or anything like that. It's just kind of talked about in the aftermath. Um, Obviously, there's a weird dynamic there between Karen and Minus because Karen is the older sister. She has that power in that regard, but obviously she's also extremely mentally unwell. Minus is very stressful and sexually kind of frustrated, as we've kind of learned during the film. So there's this weird moment where when this happens, you don't really know who to blame. And I guess nobody can really be blamed that much because Karen's mentally unwell. Minus is technically still a child, he's 17. Um, so there's there's just so many layers to try and peel away, and it's so hard to kind of say who's wrong and who's right when that happens. Um, and that's obviously a huge sort of part of the movie, but like there was just something that jumped out at me, and maybe I'm reading too much into it. Maybe this is another shadow of the doubt scenario where I'm maybe reading too much into a couple of lines, but I'm starting to wonder maybe there's a theme of like a generational issue. And I'm not gonna outwardly accuse Gunnar Bjornstjern's character of having an incestuous relationship with his daughter, and maybe that's what's leading into her illness. But the one thing that really jumped out at me, so when she has a scene at the end and she's kind of describing the face of God that she sees,
Yeah.
she describes the face of God as stony faced and dour, and I can't remember the exact word she used. But when I think of stony face and stoic and everything like that, I just think of it. I think of Gunnar Bjornstjern's character, and
True.
she, what kind of makes her go into a craze is that she starts to shout or starts to explain that this stony-faced god tried to penetrate her, and she
Right.
had to fight him off.
Right.
And I was just sitting there going, "Wow, like, am I reading too much into this here, or is she recalling past trauma and putting it through a filter to try and, escape from the trauma?"
I don't think you're reading too much into it. I don't know that. I think that's probably left somewhat ambiguous, but I think that's certainly one interpretation of it. Um, yeah, I don't think that's a stretch at all, given how the story is set up.
Okay. I thought I was going crazy. Um, and it just kind of adds another layer onto the stuff with Minus. Because it just adds that kind of generational cycle of abuse that
Mhm.
we know exists in this world, unfortunately.
Mhm.
People who are abused tend to then abuse.
Mhm.
It's just one of those horrible things in the world, that kind of cycle of abuse. Um, but yeah, it was just something that caught me. I didn't know if you guys had picked up on it or not, and I'd only picked up on it this time when I was watching it. Um, so yeah, I just wanted yeah, I was just curious if you guys had also kind of picked up on it.
I mean, it didn't cross my mind as I was watching it, but as you describe it, I don't think it's a stretch to say. I don't think Gunnar Bjornstein's character is portrayed as, well, I think he's portrayed as capable of anything. Let me say it that way. I don't think there's
Yeah.
anything that would be impossible for him, unbelievable for him as a character.
Okay.
Again, just going back to the way that they talk about, because it's not like his character is portrayed as like he has it all together, right?
No, for sure. Definitely does not have it all together.
Yeah, it's quite the opposite, right? And so I think, who knows, in a moment of panic or in a moment of desperation or loneliness, I mean, who knows what he would be capable of. I hadn't thought about that, but that is a dark read on the movie, but that's a it if you just think about it logically, it does kind of the pieces do kind of line up, which is fucked up. Um, but yeah,
But
you're not.
it may give some more weight to that her lead up to her, you know, her kind of fall from reality towards the end is one of the leads up, which just seems like kind of a way to tease her brother is like when she finds the pornographic magazine. Um, what is that, like an hour into the film? Fortunately, I couldn't watch that whole
Yeah.
scene because I had to scroll down just in case. But
Yeah, exactly. That's what I mean. It like it's been kind of put in front of you that there is a that Minus is seemingly sexually frustrated. Um,
which
Mhm.
he's on an island with the only other female being his sister. So
And no
it's
yeah,
internet.
he's like, well,
no,
I don't know how old they're supposed to be, but I mean,
yeah. Well, he's 17. I assume she's in her early 20s, I would
yeah.
guess.
Yeah.
So
It, there's a layer to this that I think is probably worth calling out. That the so you mentioned Sven Nykvist earlier. This movie, and especially the scene when they're in the boat, is staged and shot up there with some of the best cinematography, I think. Like you mentioned, apologies to Stanley Cortez, but there's a lot of shadow work and stuff that Stanley would be in a Stanley Cortez film too, right? There there is so much depth to the way this film is shot. It's like hauntingly beautiful a lot of scenes, and I think that scene where the Minus and what's her name in the movie?
Aaron,
Karen are in the boat are like that scene is shot beautifully and it's
yeah,
dark and macabre but beautiful. Um, it's almost like a poem or something. Like a it's just so layered and dense and I don't know. I was just stunned watching this entire film. I mean, even there's scenes where Karen and her dad are just standing in a room, but it's like such an interesting shot when they're in the room, the way that it's staged and it looks very theatrical. So I don't know.
yeah. I love the way all the Faro films are shot.
Yeah.
It's probably this is probably my favorite era. Like if I was to look at like eras of films, Bergman's Faro era is probably one of, if not my favorite, like era of a filmmaker. Um, I love how all of these films look because they're like there's no big fancy tracking shots or stuff with going up in cranes and things like that. It's very unfussy and very fancy, but it's also kind of expertly blocked and staged and lit that it just like every scene just looks like a medieval painting or something.
Yeah.
It's just
Exactly.
really beautiful in an understated way.
Yeah.
I love the look of all the films that they made on Faro with Sven.
The guy who was I'm trying to remember his name now. The first cinematographer that he used early in his career, Gunnar anyways, there is a talk in the one of the special features was by Peter Cowie. You know, it's always these early Criterion releases, it's always either Annette Insdorf or Peter Cowie. Um, but he was talking about how the first cinematographer who just thought he was going to be kind of like attached to Bergman, um, they split when Bergman moved away from the studios into more natural setting
Hmm.
because he saw Nyqvist's work in like a natural setting and he wanted that for his movies on the island. And where as opposed to something like Seventh Seal, which everything was on a set. And so this Gunnar guy,
Yeah, I found him. Gunnar Fisher, Seven Seal was the
Fisher,
last film they made together.
Fisher, yeah, that he was like the master at studio filming. Like he was like the best in the, or at least the best in Sweden. I don't know, maybe best in the world, but he was a master at like it working in a studio. But he switched to Nyqvist when he started to go to more natural settings, and then obviously Nyqvist became, you know, one of the greatest to do it, if not the best to do it in general. But
Mhm.
um,
So any final thoughts? Anything else you want to bring up?
No, but I might finally end up getting that Bergman set when it's on sale, since I've liked
Mhm.
most of the movies I've seen.
Yeah, and I still think there's a lot more that you'll like. Like I said, there was a couple that I could have chosen for this. Like Shame, what it was like it was between this and Shame what it came down to. But I could have chosen The Seventh Seal. The Silence is good. The Passion of Anna is really great as well. That one's very underrated, I think.
Yeah.
I think I
Cries
just
and
like that there's
Whispers. There's so many great films that I think that you would like.
yeah, and I think you kind of mentioned it when the first time I really watched it is I don't know. There's a very unpretentiousness to his movies that you wouldn't really assume on the outside. I
Yeah.
guess because so much of it ends up in a lot of the art house stuff. So it's actually kind of nice how accessible they all are, and they don't seem to think overly highly of themselves. They just seem, I don't know, I guess matter of fact.
It's
What is the
fascinating.
thing? Like it is like you can treat his films like like a piece of theater. Like he's very unpretentious. He's very accessible. Um, in that sneaky way, and like I totally get why people would assume that he's this really kind of dense, hard to watch, art house filmmaker or whatever. But a lot of time, like a lot of his films are just simple stories about people and families. Obviously he has stuff like Persona, An Hour of the Wolf that are, a bit more surreal. But like most of his other films, especially the ones now that he makes on Faro, after Through a Glass Darkly, they're just normal people going through normal things, a lot of the time.
Yeah, and I mean, I can kind of see, and I assume, I'm sure Hour of the Wolf is very, I think that's one of Lynch's favorite movies. But I think they kind of do when at least the bit I've seen of Bergman, when he does go into these surrealist places, it still comes from a place of wanting to tell a story that even if you don't get it, you get something out of it, which I think is good about Lynch as well. Like, I still don't know what the fuck Mulholland Drive's always about or Twin Peaks, but I enjoy my time watching them.
Yeah, like they would like I'm not a big surrealist guy. I think I've mentioned this before. Especially like I struggle with hard surrealism, where you have to really peel away the layers to try and find, something to tangibly link yourself to. Some people like that kind of chaos. I don't really vibe with it too much. So what I like about, and this is really why David Lynch is one of my favorite directors, because he does surrealism, but in a way that the everyman can enjoy. He's the everyman surrealist. It's not hard surrealism. What you're seeing is weird, but you can kind of get what's going on. Like you look at
there's a
something like
there's a story there
Eraserhead.
that you can follow. Like
Yeah,
at
exactly.
the end of the
There's a
day,
story.
yeah,
Yeah,
at the end of the day, maybe all you get out of it is this was the plot, but you got something out of it. Like
precisely. Yeah, no, 100%. That's why I like, a lot of Bergman stuff as well, even when it does go surreal. Like even with Persona, there's still a plot there. It's weird and all over the place, and the ending is kind of really ambiguous. But ultimately, it's just about two people spending time together on an island, and one of them is mute. Like there's a plot there, So, as to why the things are happening is another question. But at least we can kind of follow what real things are happening, if that makes sense.
Is
yeah,
it?
it doesn't feel random. And I think that's a problem with like
Yeah,
other surrealists I've seen. I'm like, why is any of this happening? And I'm sure there's a reason. I'm sure like if you ask the filmmaker, this is what this means, XYZ all the way through, but it doesn't mean anything to me
yeah,
because none of that means anything to me.
yeah,
We don't have to go down this tangent now because we still have another film to talk about. But I'm fascinated by the way y'all are talking about this, knowing, Zach, that you don't like French New Wave. I'm not trying to convince you to like it, but the New Wave stuff, they're at least like trying to have fun. Like
Are
it,
they?
yeah. I
I've
mean,
never had a bit of fun.
no, I know you haven't. No, it's
So
like I
there's a
said,
difference between the filmmaker wanting to have fun and the audience wanting to have fun. There's a defined line there.
But yeah, like I think like see these movies every time I start a Bergman movie, I'm like, oh, okay, here we go. Because the first 10 minutes is always like slow and he patient and methodical and like all the things that I'm not. So I always end up liking a Bergman movie by the end, and he always quote unquote like wins me over, which is why I like him. But every time I start a Bergman movie, I'm like, oh, for fuck, okay, here we go. Because it's just, I don't know. Like I like I guess Adam, it just goes down to what you said. I like the chaos a little bit, which is what we're about to talk about anyways here in just a minute. But I like it when a lot's going on and like you have to kind of try to almost like keep up um with what's happening on screen. So maybe it's just a difference of what we want out of a film or something, I guess.
Oh yeah,
Well,
for
just
sure.
to add on to that, just real quick before we move on, one thing I do like in movies is I do like mundaneness. Like I think
Yeah,
that's one of the big things. I'm a big horror guy, a big slasher guy. That's like a big part of the first act is these people are mundane, they're normal,
true.
they're kind of boring. And I enjoy that. Like I enjoy just hanging out with that. And I feel like that's how these movies tend to start as well, at least the ones I've seen, where there is like this so much focus on boring life. I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm into that. I don't know why, but I've always liked it.
Well, the thing that I think is very masterful about Mr. Bergman is although he sets it up in a way it's exactly like you said, he also never wastes dialogue. So anything that's in the early film, you always kind like, in the like in this movie, early on they're just having fun and cooking dinner and there's like that little, kind of inside family joke about whose direction they should follow as they're coming back in from the boat up to the house. And like, it's just like this very playful, friendly family. And so setting it up that way becomes important, right? As we watch it kind of like fall apart, I guess. So he does everything for a reason, but yeah, they're always just a little harder for me to like the first 30 minutes I'm always like, oh, not another one. And then by the end I'm like, okay, this was great.
But I guess we should talk about a movie that doesn't waste any time getting started, even a little bit, and move on to some Fellini.
It- to set the stage, again, this is Zach's week. Zach, I just
I
want
feel
to
like
go.
I'm getting blamed now. Like,
No, no,
just
no, I'm about to
remember,
blame.
I didn't really choose this.
Oh, darn, you ruined the joke. I was gonna say Zach chose Casanova. No, no. This theme is that we pick. So I know that y'all are, well, we'll see how this goes. Y- This was your first Fellini film, is that right?
That is correct.
Oh, beautiful. Okay, great. Go ahead then, Adam, if you want to, I don't know if you want to do the formal thing. I just wanted to
Sure.
set that stage.
That's okay. I have it in front of me here. So we're talking about Fellini's Casanova from 1976, and the blurb from Letterboxd is Casanova is a libertine collecting seductions and sexual feats, but is he really interested in someone, and is he really an interesting person? Is he really alive?
What a synopsis.
Yeah, there you go. That's it. That's the movie. We'll see you guys in 2 weeks.
So
Yeah.
I swear to God, Chris, if you tell me on They Shoot Pictures that this is higher
I'm
than the
I'm getting ready for
1600s,
it.
I'm is that what we're gonna get?
Are y'all both sitting down?
No, I know. I knew it. I knew he
Fuck
was going to
me.
do this.
Actually, let's do this just to build the suspense a little bit, okay? So Bergman, where was Through a Glass Darkly? It was like the 14th
It
Bergman or
was
something.
too fucking low. It's all I remember.
No, no, I mean it was 1673, but in terms of like how many Bergman movies, it was like the 12th or 14th or something. Or we
Yeah,
went to
something like that. Yeah, we
Yeah.
went a long time before we mentioned it.
all right. So I could have chosen 8.5. That would have been the obvious choice as like the best Fellini film. But I didn't want that to be your intro to Fellini, and that's the seventh best film of all time. Again, according to this list that y'all are about to disagree with. Um, La Dolce Vita would have been another interesting choice to start with. That was the one I was going to choose if not for Casanova. That's 34th best. La Strada is 73. Um, Amarcord is 77. Knights of Cabiria is 197. Satyricon is, which is his sort of like a sci-fi film, in a weird way.
But
At
you
least,
skipped out on the sci-fi film? I would have totally
yeah,
been down for a sci-fi movie.
yeah, but it has it's the same thing as what you just saw, but um, I think this is the well, I like Casanova better than Satyricon, and they're both similar of just like heavy imagery based sort of like absurdist sort of filmmaking. So of the two of them, I thought this one would be more enjoyable. But 557 Satyricon, his Roma 600, I Vitelloni is 651, which I think is the one Adam would have wanted me to pick.
That's way too low. That might be my favorite Fellini.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's a good one. Well, we'll get into this in just a second. The apology he made to his wife after he cheated on her, Juliet of the Spirits, is 888. And then we get into okay, so Through a Glass Darkly was 1673. Fellini's Casanova is 1127, so 500 spots
So
above.
it's almost in the top 1,000.
Yeah.
Oh my good God.
It's right behind Blazing Saddles
What a
and slightly
combo.
above Kill Bill Volume 1.
What? No. No.
Hey, this is 13,000 independent critics putting a list together to
13,000 people to add to my hit list.
Is it like 13,000 people they required to do like a line of coke before they did like their list?
But this above Kill Bill Volume 1. That is just like objectively insane. Like, say what you will about this film, Casanova, whatever. Kill Bill Volume 1 fucking rips.
It is good. It is good.
So I guess I will go ahead and like give my 2 cents. I did not real like. I think the movie has some like kick-ass sets. Like I really like the what do you call that Maximilia? What there's a term for it. Like when you go
Maximism.
maximism. Yeah, yeah,
It's the opposite of minimalism. Maximum
yeah. So
minimalism.
yeah, there's a lot of that, and I think it's cool. I just watched Bram Stoker's Dracula movie, which does a lot of that as well. I like Ken Russell, who I think does that really well, and that's kind of what I felt about this movie. Is like, is it just trying to be a Ken Russell movie? Because
Yep.
that's what I felt the entire time I watched it. Like, but I felt like when people tell me they don't like Ken Russell because they find him obnoxious, I'm like, okay, I kind of get it now, like a little bit, like I get
You had your
it.
Ken Russell moment.
Yeah, like um yeah, I mean it was a fascinating watch. From what I got to see, like I said, every time that girl showed her ass I had to like scroll down to the comments, and no one on the train thought I was watching pornography. Every time there was like the 38 sex scenes I had to scroll down, so maybe I missed some vital information. Not sure. But yeah, it was a fascinating watch. I'm not sure it convinced me to watch more Fellini necessarily.
I'm gonna try to do my part to fix that.
Okay.
But, Adam, what'd you think? I know this is the top 10 movie for you.
So I feel like a lot of my thoughts can be summed up by one question. Why would I watch this movie when I can just watch Barry Lyndon instead?
Yeah, that's a good question.
That's actually
Like,
a very insightful question. Very, because they're both kind of biopics, right?
I found them very similar.
Yeah.
They're both about these charlatans who travel around and have exploits and try and get their way with people and ultimately end up broken.
Yeah.
I
And
feel like they're very similar. They're obviously time period wise relatively similar. They're both played by it's both of well, I suppose Donald Sutherland's Canadian, but North Americans, playing European kind of playboys. I
Yeah, this
just
is kind of weird that I can sit there and say, in these two, Ryan O'Neal did the better job.
yeah.
It's so
Um,
shocking.
yeah, I found these films very similar in a lot of ways, but then Barry Lyndon is better in every way. So I'm just like I just don't see why I would ever need to sit down and watch this movie when I can get everything I need from Barry Lyndon in a better package. But to give my a kind of more honest, well, not honest, but to give a wider kind of opinion on the film and what I did and didn't like, I agree with Zach. Sets are great, costumes are great. It's an interesting the production design is interesting. I was a little bit disappointed with the direction. I didn't think it had that much flair or dynamism, whatever. Which was shocking, coming from, I've seen a lot of like unlike Saka, I've seen my fair few Fellini films. I've seen most of the ones that you mentioned in, that are above it in the They Shoot Pictures. I think the only one that you mentioned that I hadn't seen is Juliet of the Spirits. I'm pretty sure I saw all the rest of them. And he's a fantastic director,
Mhm.
even if I don't particularly like love any of his films 5 out of 5, except for maybe 8.5, and David Aloni. Um, he's a very talented filmmaker and director, and he has a unique cinematic voice. But a lot of this stuff just kind of felt very bland. From a direction standpoint, again, not talking about the actual, sets and stuff. But I just like if you would show me this film and I had to guess who the filmmaker was, I would never in a million years have said Fellini. I
Right.
could sit there all day guessing directors, and I would have never said it was Fellini if you had, if you'd removed, scrubbed every kind of name, it scrubbed his name off everything. Um, so yeah, like the sets and the production design, interesting. Donald Sutherland he's at least interesting. I don't think he's particularly good in this movie or anything, but he's interesting. Um, but I just didn't get anything from it, I guess is the best way I can put it. Like I'm not gonna sit here and say, it's a piece of crap or whatever. Um, but I just didn't get anything from it. I didn't feel connected to the film. I didn't feel connected to any of the characters, what was going on. I just didn't really care what was happening for the whole film. And like, yeah, I just didn't like Casanova's not a good guy, but neither is Barry Lyndon. But like, I actually cared about what Barry Lyndon was up to.
Yeah, there's like
So
this charm with like Barry as a
yeah,
character.
he's a
Yeah.
scoundrel. You don't want to like.
And you
You're
kind of root
kind
for him
of,
because he's
you
an
kind of,
underdog.
exactly. You
Casanova's
kind of
never an
root for him.
underdog.
Yeah, he's just an asshole who's like really horny all the time and has a unique way of of doing intercourse, whatever his form uh is interesting, I guess. But yeah, I'm sorry. Like I said this in my letterbox review, which I can read to the people. My letterbox review is I genuinely tried, Chris. I did. Because I did genuinely try, because I know I was giving you shit kind of for the week leading up to this, going, oh, this film's gonna be a piece of crap. We're watching this 2.5 hour piece of crap, whatever. But obviously I'd never seen it. And I did genuinely try, but I just didn't care.
Yeah.
I didn't care about what was happening or who it was happening to. I just kept putting my cursor over to see how long was left.
Fair enough.
Chris has been waiting the whole time to like explain to us why we're wrong. So
Yeah,
I'd love to hear it. I'm
please
really
tell us.
anxious to hear it, honestly.
Yeah.
Not wrong, but here's the interesting thing about I'm trying to think of where to start because I have about 10 different things I want to say. But Fellini is a director who I think is number one kind of misunderstood because most people talk about the films eight and a half and before, and he doesn't get as much discussion around what he did later in his career. So uh, my one of the many reasons I love eight and a half, but well, I won't get into it just because this is not an eight and a half episode. But one of the many reasons I love it is because he sort of announces to the world that he's going to be his own director now. He's not going to be tied to a studio. And I mean, you can argue that it was probably helpful for him to be tied to a studio. I'm wide open to that argument. But from his perspective, he had nothing but constraints and pressure to be somebody that he was not, right? He was a cartoonist. He was an artist. He came up through magazines making like comic strips for magazines and newspapers. He was a surrealist. He hung out with Buñuel. Like he was this guy in Casanova more than he was the guy in I Vitelloni, um, in his soul, right? So everything after eight and a half, if you look at it, he did have trouble getting financing, but he was making what he wanted to make more. And there's sort of a rebel spirit to a lot of his movies after eight and a half. One thing that's very important to say out of the gate is he hated Casanova. So there's a quote I want to read that I think is interesting. It's not that long. He said he saw Casanova as somebody who traveled throughout the entire world, but it's as if he never got out of bed. He said, and this is coming from Fellini, who is Italian. He is really an Italian. The indefiniteness, the indifference, the commonplaces, the conventional ways, the facade, the attitude, and therefore it is clear why he has become a myth, because he is really nothing. universality without meaning, a complete lack of individuality, the indeterminate, and this film is aimed at being precisely this kind of portrait of nothing. So Fellini hated Casanova as a character. He found him to be vapid and he saw him to have like this kind of void in his life that he tried to fill through his adventures. He saw him as a charlatan, like you said, and he saw him as mm, somebody who is understood incorrectly and should be viewed as a villain, not as a hero. And he got money from both Dino De Laurentiis, who then eventually pulled out, and then the sort of a classic Italian producer Alberto Grimaldi, who worked with Pasolini a lot. He's the one that produced Salo and a lot of Pasolini's work, and a lot of Fellini's work too. He got $12 million from them, which I don't know how much that was in lira, but that's a lot. And it was one of the most expensive productions in the history of Italian cinema because he pitched it as Fellini making a Casanova movie. And everybody was excited about him making a Casanova movie. But what they got was he, something that even he described as an anti-eroticism. Like he wanted to make a movie that was anti-erotic. Nothing is supposed to be erotic in this movie. Everything is supposed to be ugly and grotesque and uh, you're supposed to hate it, I guess, for lack of a better word. And
He
the sex,
succeeded.
yeah, the sex is supposed to be comical and as if he's like spoofing Casanova of being a lover. Kind of, it's like his way of being like, but come on, really, like this guy's an idiot, right? And the reason there was a bunch of people that were supposed to play this role. Obviously, Marcello Mastroianni is one that's always up there for conversation. John Maria Valente was up there in conversation. And then there was a few American actors, but like Robert Redford was one, like traditionally handsome men. And not to say that Donald Sutherland is handsome or not, but he had a fake nose and a fake chin in this. And he broke up with Dino De Laurentiis because he refused to use anybody but Donald Sutherland. And De Laurentiis wanted a handsome like Casanova, and Grimaldi kind of said, "Whatever, do what you're going to do. You're Fellini." So he used him, and specifically, he wanted to make him grotesque and uh, mm, clearly unsexy. Like he made Sutherland shave his head and wear that wig and put on prosthetics, and he tried to make him as sort of unpleasant as possible. Um, so I love this is like the reason I wanted to show you all this, and the reason I chose this as the first one is because Zach, I feel like at some point in your life, there's a good chance you'll watch I Vitelloni, or there's a good chance you'll watch Eight and a Half or something, but nobody ever talks about the back half of Fellini's career, and I wanted to expose y'all to that, um, and just sort of get this, you know, I think in 5 years you'll look back on this movie differently than you do now, and we'll see. Hopefully, we're still doing a podcast then,
Yeah, I'm gonna
and
like I'm gonna actually put something in my Apple Calendar right now for when we record in 5 years, and I'll tell you, Chris, if it's true or not.
yeah, perfect. Because I think this is a movie that is shocking in a few different ways, but like it's like a shock to the system in a little bit. And when I was going through his films the first time, I had the benefit of going from his very traditional style of storytelling and filmmaking to and working with studio writers. Like he was working with Tonino Guerrera and like these people that were making a lot of other Italian films as well, and also working with him. And then he started working with Bernardino Zapponi, who was with him for all of his like batshit crazy movies. And Zapponi was another comic book writer and artist, and they just like outdid each other in like creating crazier scenes, right? And so they just kind of fed into each other. And like Zapponi was his partner in crime for the later part of his career. Um, and so the last thing I'll say before we get into the movie a little bit more or whatever is that everything Fellini did is also autobiographical. He was an intensely selfish person. And if you look through his filmography, it's either his life, like his early movies are kind of looking back on his life, and the later years are either a comment on mistakes he's made or some version of a comment on himself. And so there's a lot of thought. Fellini never said this, but there's a lot of thought that the reason he was so drawn to the character of Casanova is because he saw himself in that way. Fellini was riddled with debt. He was beholden to producers. He was just constantly getting another movie financed in order to stay alive and stay afloat. He was sort of known adulterer. Like he had a lot of the same bad traits that Casanova had, and so there's a lot of critical writing and thinking about how this was actually his psyche leaking out, and there's a reason he was drawn to this story so much. So I think that's interesting as well. I'll take a pause there. That's why I like this movie so much. I think it's a fascinating piece of like protest art and something that is memorable. And it did win Best Costume and Best Production Design, both at Academy Awards and also at the British Awards, BAFTA or whatever. So that y'all are kind of picking up on the things that it was famous for. Um,
I
yeah,
think a tough part for me, as someone who knows literally nothing about Fellini, it's really cool that he was a guy who kind of incorporated his own life. But I feel like that's part of why you get so much out of it. You know a whole lot about him. Whereas I'm just looking at this as, man, this dude sucks. Which I guess is what he wanted, but at the same
yeah.
time, it's like, I don't have I feel like I'm almost missing that needed context.
That's what we're doing today.
Yeah, yeah.
I'm catching you up. Like I honestly did. I had no idea if y'all would like it or not, but I honestly did think about this as like watching it and then talking about it and seeing if it like I don't know how to say this. Like I kind of intentionally wanted to shock a little bit with it. Like that was an intentional choice, right? Just to like, and maybe it's not to say that I don't know. I hope that comes off in the right way. Like I purposely chose this because I know it's crazy and like insanity is there and like all that stuff is there. And I was hoping we could have like a discussion about it afterwards and kind of piece apart why and that kind of thing. So that was, I think unfortunately, like he is such an autobiographical filmmaker that as he pulls away from studio writers and just goes more into himself, you almost need to have the background of watching La Dolce Vita and Eight and a Half and some of these earlier ones to understand like what he's doing before he gets into City of Women and before he gets into Satyricon and Roma and all these other ones. But of that bunch, I think Casanova is the most interesting. Um, and yeah,
That part doesn't really sit too kind of well with me, this apparent need of context. Like for me, like there's a lot of directors are autobiographical. A lot of Bergman's work is very autobiographical, based on past relationships and stuff like that.
sure.
Um, a lot of David Lynch's work is somewhat autobiographical, but you don't need to know the background to enjoy the movies. So I don't think we can use that as an excuse because I think if the film is good enough, it will stand up regardless and if you have the context or not. Um, so for me, I don't think we can use the excuse to say, oh, well, you just don't know enough about Fellini. That's why you didn't like the movie. Like, I think if the film is good enough, it should stand up without the context. Like, you know, I'll use Eraserhead as an example. Eraserhead is all about David Lynch's fear of failing as a new father.
Right.
But you don't need to know that to enjoy Eraserhead, and that's equally wacky and weird and strange and alien. Obviously, much more darkly surreal as opposed to Casanova, and I never liked calling Fellini a surrealist director because I just know it just never fit my definition of surrealism. I always I always link surrealism with darkness and darker themes. I always describe Fellini as fantasticism, or more fantasy than surreal, which I know I'm kind of like picking apart hairs, but um, that's just in my brain. That's how I kind of differentiate different types of surrealism, I guess.
Mhm.
Um, but you don't have to know about David Lynch's history about being a father or whatever to enjoy Eraserhead. Whereas I feel like kind of the point you've made to Zach there is that you need to know more about Fellini to enjoy this film, which I don't think, like, I think if the film is good enough, it should be good enough, if that makes sense. Like I can understand why people would like this movie, and I definitely understand why you like it because obviously you love anarchy
Yeah,
in your art.
yeah, yeah.
This is just, this is who you are. You like punk music, you like you know, low budget schlock. You like people who just do what they want, and that's great. That's what you like, and you're very consistent in liking that stuff. So it's understandable why you would like this movie and why you would choose it and stuff like that. And that makes complete sense. Um, the only thing, like I said, that I would push back on is this idea that if we because I know a lot about Fellini as well, and I still didn't enjoy it. So that's the only thing I'll push back on, you know, this idea that if Zach knew more about Fellini, he might like the film better. I know a lot about Fellini and I didn't like the film any better. Um, so yeah.
Now, I mean, I'll put kind of my perspective here as well as I am someone who is adamantly into into a concept of death of the author. Like once they put it out, their context just no longer what their meaning was, with why they wrote it, just doesn't really matter. It can be interesting. I love like reading a perspective of why like a director wrote this or why they directed this or why they made these choices. That can be very fascinating because I think there's something to learn from that. But I also don't think their perspective is necessarily that end all be all. Like there's plenty of movies where I've come to find out later on, no, the person actually, I find it to mean this, but that person actually meant the opposite. That doesn't really matter to me because that's not what I gained out of it. That sort of thing. Because for me, I could just, I feel like if I'm just lost, I kind of zone out.
That's fair.
That's just how I've always been. Like once I like feel like I'm not given enough to just come to my own conclusion, I'm just out.
That's actually a pretty good point because yeah, that's actually a pretty interesting point because I'm just thinking about this now. I do if I'm sitting there just totally confounded on what's happening on screen, I do tend to dig in a little bit and try to figure out what was like. So maybe I give people too much credit if I can see it from their perspective, then I'm like, oh, okay, and I like it more, even if I didn't like it watching it. So maybe but that's a good point though. I mean, art should kind of stand on its own, right?
Well, it's the
Um,
same thing. We had this discussion about me with French New Wave. Is I just don't feel like it gives me enough to grab onto.
mm.
Like I have always, and it causes me to zone out of the movie. Like I don't need my hand to be held. I don't need anything like that, but I need it to hook me in some way
Right.
because and like I said, I don't mind things being mundane at the start. Like I think that's great. I think that can be, but you've got to give me like something to feel like I'm not just like I go to like I actually I'll use the example that one of my favorite reviews from Ebert was talking about Paul Thomas Anderson's The Master, where he said he would go to grab something and all he got was air. And I can kind of feel that sometimes where I was like I want to grab something, but I don't know what I'm grabbing at. Like I don't know where to go with it. And it just causes me to be like, okay, this isn't for me. And maybe that's unfair, but it's just how I've always been.
No, it's not fair or unfair. I mean, we're just for the same reason I'm talking about why I love it so much. I mean, we're all just kind of talking about the what we like in films, right? Um, I guess I don't have too much else to say in terms of defending it. I mean, at the end of the day, if it didn't grab you, then that's fair. I mean, I will say that as opposed to uh, what was the one that we did, the three surrealist films? Um,
Oh fuck me, Cocteau.
Cocteau.
Yeah,
As
I liked
opposed
it better than those.
to good, good, good. As opposed, I didn't know what we were going to get into when I suggested Cocteau. Just that I really like Beauty and the Beast. This one, I will say, I knew exactly what we were getting into, so y'all
Well,
can get mad at me for this one.
well, I mean, it will be interesting because I mean, I'm not going to sit here and say, "Yep, Casanova is the reason I'll never watch Eight and a Half" or whatever else you named. I don't know Fellini films.
Mm-mm-mm.
Um, so it could be interesting to think back on it once I delve more into. I don't know when that would be, but
The
uh,
if you the one thing I'll say, I guess, in defense of not discounting something because of my bad decisions, he is somebody who's a director and not necessarily a writer. He did a lot of writing, but he always had a team of writers around him. And like the movies where he's famous for had writers that were very grounded in more realism.
mhm.
So he got to put his flares in, his like artistic flares in, but the story was very grounded. So like If Vitelloni is one of the ones that we're talking about, like that's a story of four restless youth that like are frustrated not having any positive like outlook for their careers. And like what do you do with that? They're freeloaders, right? They're just they're struggling to get by in this little town, and it's the town that he grew up in. So he got to tell a personal story, but he had a team of writers helping him shape that story into something that was very grounded. So I think the reason most people talk about the first half of his career is because he was doing less writing and more directing, and he's an extremely talented director. Once he got into more writing is when I think people start to lose him a little bit. Um, I, you make a good point, Adam. I like the back half of his career a lot because of the chaos, but it's a good point you brought up. I think I probably put too much weight on that in terms of showing it off. It's like showing off a band you like that everyone else is like, what the fuck is this noise?
Yeah, it's kind of like going deep into screamo when somebody just likes like Judas Priest. You know,
Yeah,
everyone likes Judas Priest. That's fine.
yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, I would say anything before 8.5. If you were to watch, I mean, there's a few ones. I didn't really like Il Bidone, although it's a popular one. I didn't like the ending at all. But I mean, but for the most part, anything before 8.5, you're gonna have it's gonna be very, very far from this. It's just gonna be like, his characters are always kind of mischievous. One of the things he does very well as a writer, which ironically is not in Casanova, but all of his characters have a lot of depth and nuance. So the his main sort of male muse is this guy named Marcello Mastroianni. He's the lead in most of his films, and he's always like both like a um what's the word I'm looking for? He's a complicated character. Like he has good intentions, but he can't control his urges, and he's always looking at women, and like he he's a purist in some ways, but then he's always like behind in money, and like he has this very complicated personality that I think is fascinating to watch, and all of his characters have a lot of depth. This one didn't, I think, specifically because he was trying to tell a biography, or he was trying to tell the story of Casanova but but his thinking was, what if you tell the story of Casanova from the perspective of somebody who doesn't buy it, like somebody that who thinks this guy's a joke, and so the whole thing is presented as like this alternative look on the myth of Casanova, I guess, as somebody who's just an idiot. Um, I don't know. It that I'll shut up. That's why I loved it.
you
But
know,
I appreciate y'all sticking with and giving it a fair shot.
and it's also, I guess, fair to note that I really don't know anything about Casanova. Like I know the kind of what he represents, like in a popular context,
Yeah,
but
yeah, yeah.
like I don't know a single thing about him as a human being, like who he was, what he did, what he accomplished. So part of it part of loss in translation could always be you're taking a more farce element of something I don't understand. It's almost like I don't know anything about a single thing about a horror film, and then I go watch Scary Movie, and I'm just like, I don't understand any of this. Like none of this is registering to me.
Oh, the like the satire of it. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And I mean, I could have used Scream, and the reason I didn't, because Adam would have corrected me that Scream is still a great movie, even if you don't know it perfectly. So he would be correct.
Absolutely, it
Yeah,
is.
yeah.
Because my wife is a great attestant to that. She has seen very little horror movies, but at her suggestion last week, she said, "Hey, do you want to watch Scream?" And I said, "Fuck yeah, I want to watch Scream. That's a great suggestion." So yeah, Scream is great regardless of who you are and where you've been
Another
and what you've
another
seen.
movie that's behind Casanova on these shoot pictures.
Wait, what?
That can't be real.
No. What? Where
There
is that
can't be.
at? No, you got to
You're
look it up now.
It's
you're an.
1538.
Oh my God, I hate this.
Adam is now starting to join the bandwagon of how much I hate they shoot pictures.
Oh, I'm fully on board. I'm up there front seat with you.
You know, there's an interesting point here that I'm gonna say that's gonna derail a lot of what I've said up until now. But there is, if you're from like a, if you get into like film critique, I mean, obviously we're all speaking as people that read film critique, right? Although we're trying to become critics, maybe to some level. But there is a masturbatory element to Fellini, for sure, right? And the fact that this film is so high is interesting to me as I think about it, because this is a fairly divisive movie. Like it's 2.5 hours of a spectacle, right? I mean, visually, like it's a spectacle, right? Um, but it's not really a tight story. Like it is a very loose biopic. And there's a lot in it that if you're getting a bit nitpicky around, or not nitpicky, but if you're going to look at it critically through like how he's telling the story, like it's not necessarily told well. Now he's doing that on purpose. He just wants to highlight events in Casanova's life. He's not trying to create a strong through line, right? Other than to show that he's a charlatan. And I think that, well, anyways, I'll get into that in a second. But yeah, it is interesting to think about so many critics liking this movie so much that you wonder like if there's like a film school element to this or like if they're reading about it and going in knowing they're going to like it or something like that. Like if it's you do wonder if it's like the authenticity of their opinion, I guess, if that makes sense. I hope that makes sense. Like how is it so highly rated if it's such a divisive movie, I guess.
Yeah, it's this is the thing. It's like the theory I have of why The Shawshank Redemption is number one on IMDb.
Mm-hmm.
And my theory, which I talked about before, is that people see it number one on IMDb and they watch it, and because it doesn't suck, they assume that it is the best movie, and then they give it whatever 10 out of 10 on IMDb, and then it just kind of goes around as an echo chamber.
Mm-hmm.
Like when you're going in to watch, like I had no idea this was so high on They Shoot Pictures or whatever. I didn't really know anything about it at all. I'd never seen any kind of critical analysis or whatever. But typically speaking, and this is not true of every, every time you go to watch a movie, but typically speaking, if you go to watch a film and you know it's very highly rated, knowing that in itself is almost um compromising the integrity of of the
Yeah,
review.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Um and it takes a confident critic to know something is highly rated and still kind of say, well, no, I don't care this highly rated, it's just a piece of shit. I
Uh-huh.
think of like the rules of the game, for example, which is like,
Mhm.
I don't know, like number two on They Shoot Pictures or whatever. It's top five, I think, or
Right,
whatever.
right,
And like that film's a piece of shit. Um, and but that's because I am comfortable in in what I like. I don't really, I'm beyond that phase now where I feel like I have to like films just because they're well liked.
right,
Like that's something that's very teenagery. Like I'm beyond that now. I like what I like, and if I think something's shit, I'll just say it's shit, even if it's really highly rated.
right.
Um, and I feel like Zach's the same way, and then you're the same way as well. You know what, going against Vertigo, and Zach's very unpretentious in that way as well. So I think that we like, despite none of us being, official credited published critics or whatever, that almost makes it easy. Like that almost makes us better judgments of character because we don't have anybody then coming, backlashing against us because, we're not writing in the New Yorker about how we think some of the greatest films of all time are actually shit. Um, so we
Right,
have that freedom being independent, like quote unquote critics.
right.
We have that freedom where we can say that things are shit, even if it's controversial. Whereas a lot of these people who are publishing these lists and are probably being used, perhaps maybe I don't want to say they're not brave enough to do it or whatever, but perhaps there's a bit more pressure there to try and
Yeah.
be more in vogue.
Like they're
So
they're
as in
thinking through like the lens of legacy, right? Like how do they want to be remembered as a critic as far as in addition to whether or not they like the movie, right?
exactly, it's all and like this is like this kind of idea of the film canon,
Uh,
about a lot of people are not going to move away from that. A lot of people end up like it's the reason why the Sight and Sound poll results change very slightly all the time
right, 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 right.
because people watch all the films that are in the Sight and Sound poll, and because most of them are good, then they end up again in the next one. It's only really every now and again that you get big surprises, like Jean Dielman showing up suddenly at number one last time around.
Right.
Which, regardless of your thoughts on Jean Dielman, it's cool as fuck that a film like that can suddenly jump up to number one out of the blue and go completely against the canon.
Yeah, it jumped up like 50
Uh,
spots or something crazy, right? Which
Yeah,
is
so like regardless of your feelings on the film, which let's not ask Zach his opinion of the film. So regardless of your feelings of the film, it's still
right,
cool that that can sometimes happen, but for the vast majority of the time, that doesn't happen.
right.
The films all stay roughly in the same place.
Well, and I've seen that kind of go the other way, where you're talking about, you feel like you like something because you're supposed to.
Yeah,
I remember the story, critics hating on the original Halloween when it came out. It
Right.
wasn't until Ebert's review, where he went against the grain and said it was a fantastic movie, where critics reevaluated it and said,
Mm.
"Oh yeah, it's a great movie." It's funny how just small changes, like somebody taking it seriously, and saying, "You know what, fuck that. No, that's not how. That's what are y'all talking about?"
Well,
Like,
Night of the Hunter, right?
no,
yeah,
so
yeah.
many
And
films.
years
Blade
later,
Runner, 2001: A Space. There's so many films that are considered classics now, were often not loved when they were released. It's actually a rarer thing than you would think that a film becomes an instant classic. I think the only example I can think of off the top of my head would be something like, Citizen Kane, where it just became like an instantly beloved film that everyone raved about. Um, a lot
or
of the
Coppola in the '70s, you do get some,
Yeah,
yeah, those kind
yeah,
of things.
yeah, like instant classics, especially for older films, are a lot harder to come across than you would think. It seems to be a much more modern phenomena.
Yeah, yeah. It's interesting. Well, I love this discussion. I mean, I guess if nothing else, we got a good discussion out of it. I appreciate you all sitting through with me. There's one more thing I want to mention just very quickly for anybody that's interested in watching this. If we're 170 episodes in now, or whatever we're at, 155 or whatever we're at, and you feel like your tastes align with me in terms of the chaos, and you're curious about this, there's one thing I do like to call out a lot, and that's the way that machines are used. So he has like this little toy kind of owl that's like a very phallic owl that he uses to
Yeah,
that bounces up and down whenever he's in his Casanova lovemaking mode. And then in the end of the movie, he ends up having his the first time like he's really feeling fulfilled is with a robot and somebody who's not lifeless. And I think that's just cool because like that's Fellini getting one more jab at like the bullshit of Casanova that like again thinking about this the fact this movie was made in the I don't even know when it was made 70s I guess. Um
1976 came out.
yeah, the view on robotics and AI. I mean, I don't think he was trying to predict, and I'm not going to give him credit for any of that. I'm just saying like the idea that the best sex Casanova had from his perspective was with a lifeless being, I think is a nice way to end the film and sort of drive home his point that like this whole thing is uh, we need to reconsider like the concept of a Casanova and like reconsider the idea that there's like this classic lover who was just so amazing at sex that he was able to get at the highest courts of Europe and just like go around and just get by on the his virility. Um, that's like a weird myth to kind of celebrate.
Mm.
Uh, I thought that was a nice way to end the movie of really like driving that point home.
Alrighty. So as we wrap things up, Chris, I think it's your turn. I hope you remember what we're going to be doing next time because I don't.
I do actually. Um, Thank you all for going down this path with me. Um, for Casanova, I'm gonna do something much more grounded in a country. When was the last time we went to Japan? I'm trying to think. When's the last time we took a trip to Japan? We did an Otsu episode.
We did that two versions of the same movie that one time
Oh,
in the
the
graveyard.
Takashi Miike and
Oh,
Oh, that's
Christ.
technically Hong Kong, right? One of
no,
them
no, no, no,
Japanese
no.
though.
Yeah, they're both
Graveyards
Japanese
of
directors.
Honor.
Okay, okay.
That's the one that, yeah, speaking of ones that I liked a little bit more than you, Adam.
Yeah, Christ.
Oh, it's too funny. Um, okay, so there is people talk about Bond here in the US. The we don't have a ton of long running movies with the same character that was brought into films over 3 decades, 4 decades. We don't, there's a few of them, but we don't have dozens of them in the US, right? That's a fairly uncommon thing. That's much more common in Japan. Their history is their film history and like their, the way they do movies is they're much shorter runs in the theater and they are made for cheaper and they make their money back quickly. And if it's popular, they might run for like 10 weeks instead of four. And they'll make their money and then they'll just keep pushing out sequels until they stop making money. So there's a lot of more like reoccurring characters in Japanese film history. That's a much more common thing. However, even in that culture, one of the most enduring and long-running characters is a blind swordsman who is an expert with a sword, and the movies are more episodic in nature, so they don't necessarily build on each other. You don't need to know the whole story of this blind swordsman in order to understand film nine or whatever. It's independent stories. And the character's name is Zatoichi. I don't remember. I used to know this. I don't
Can't
remember
wait to
exactly.
fuck this pronunciation up all next time. Every time.
Yeah, ichi is the Japanese word for one or number one or best. So anytime you see a word ending in ichi, it means like the number one or the best or those kinds of things. I can't remember the breakdown of the word zato. I meant to freshen up on that. But Zatoichi is the name of this guy. Um, and he just goes on adventures. What we're gonna do, I want to do two movies next time. And I know this is weird, but I think the best place to start in the series is actually the third movie. So the third movie is called New Tale of Zatoichi. It's the first movie that's in color. The first two are black and white, and the rest are in color. By the way, I should mention there's 26 or 27 total films, plus a long-running TV show. So this character is like deep into the Japanese psyche. And obviously with the Criterion box set and stuff, it's more, I mean, he's a known character in the West as well. But I think even as much as we know him and as much as I love him, there's still like a whole world of context. I mean, I don't think any of us have unless you're like really hardcore into it or Japanese and grew up with it. Um, Anyways, so number three, I think, is the best place to start. 1963, New Tale of Zatoichi. So we're gonna do that one. And then I'm going back and forth on which one to do next. I really like seven and eight. Um, but I think the best one to probably do, after New Tale of Zatoichi is to go to number 6, which is a 1964 movie, which again says kind of something about how quickly they're making these movies, right? Number 3 was in 1963. Number 6 was in 1964.
I just
Um,
love that. At the first, I'm adding these on Letterboxd. So the first one, you tell us number three, you gave a 9 out of 10, and then you're like, go to number six, and I'm like, okay, and you gave it a 5 out of 10. So real exciting.
oh, wait a minute. I wonder if I got. Oh no, seven, seven, seven,
Okay,
seven.
okay,
Thank you. Thank you for catching that.
yeah, because I was about to watch Toichi and the Chest of Gold.
Chest of
So
Gold. No, no, 7. Flashing Sword. I got the
perfect.
numbers wrong. Um, Zatoichi's Flashing Sword is number 7, 1964. Again, same thing. So the first 7 movies were made between 1963 and 1964. Um, but yeah. So New Tale of Zatoichi and then Zatoichi's Flashing Sword, I think are the two. First one being a very classic, like this is what Zatoichi is. This is who he is. And 7 being where he starts to introduce a little bit more artistic flair and they bring in new directors and new writers and they start to play with the series more. The other one I was tempted to do is the one where he fights Yojimbo. So if you want to watch a third one, if you have time to watch a third one and we want to talk about it, I think it could be fun to talk about the one where he fights Yojimbo. Um, which is 18, I want to
Number
say.
20, Zatoichi meets Yojimbo.
20. Perfect.
And
Number
is Mifune in that?
20.
Or is someone else playing
Yes, it
Yojimbo?
says so. It says he does
It
play him.
is Toshiro Mifune, yeah.
Fuck yeah, that sounds awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think we do three. They're all short. I
Yeah,
think we do
I
three.
was gonna say, yeah, like Zatoichi meets Yojimbo is the longest one at 115 minutes, but the other two are like 80 to 90. So
Yeah.
like I'm cool doing three if you think the Yojimbo one is worth it.
I think well, especially yeah, I mean yes, short answer is yes. It's a great movie and I think it's fun to watch that character, Yojimbo character in a different setting
Yeah,
like
and
this.
I'll refresh and watch New Jimbo, so that'll work out.
Perfect. So New Tale of Zatoichi, Zatoichi's Flashing Sword, and Zatoichi meets Yojimbo.
Sounds good to
Perfect.
me.
Yeah.
I'll add those to my watch list as well. We should probably say we haven't exactly done our schedules, listeners, so it's possible we might not be releasing this episode until November because we're going to be back with a Halloween special in October. We're going to be doing 2 episodes in October, covering a beloved horror franchise, kind of like what we did last year with the Scream specials. We're going to be doing that again this year for October. So it's possible we might not get this episode out, the Zatoichi ones, until November.
Yeah.
So don't stress. If you want to watch all 20 whatever Zatoichi films, like you have like loads of time. But if you are wanting to watch along with us, don't be too stressed on the timeline because it's likely we're not going to have this episode out until sometime in November because we're going to be doing that horror double in October.
Yeah, that's a good point. And in the meantime, we have 4 interviews that I'm recording in the next 2 weeks. So we're going to start having a lot more interviews coming back as well. We can figure out the timing of that, but
Ooh,
there's a lot of good stuff coming.
awesome. Well, look, I think we'll wrap things up there. Of course, as previously mentioned a few times, but I'll mention it again. I'll put some links down in the description for the new podcasts that we're a part of. There's a few different ones that are cropping up. So if you just, if you're a boutique Blu-ray fan and you're into some of the companies that we're covering in our different podcasts, then go and give them a listen, give them a follow. There's at least a couple of episodes out now of each podcast that you can kind of, catch up on in the meantime. If you're kind of watching slash listening to this on YouTube, hello, leave us a comment, leave us a like, helps with the algorithm and all that stuff. Um, and yeah, this was fun. This was a fun episode. Even if I didn't like the Fellini film, I think we had some fun today, which is always nice.
Thank you. Awesome. Thanks, Phil.
Cool.
So yeah.
Hello, my name is Kevin Tudor, and I'm one of the 3 hosts of Almost Major, a film podcast dissecting many major indie studios and the films they release. Every week, myself, Charlie Nash, and Bryden Doyle discuss overlooked, forgotten, or bona fide classic indie films via studio-specific miniseries. We've previously covered numerous films from Artisan Entertainment, Lionsgate Films, and New Line Cinema. Titles including The Blair Witch Project, American Psycho, Dogville, But I'm a Cheerleader, Saw, Requiem for a Dream, and Ringmaster, you know, the Jerry Springer film. Anyways, we have a fun time every week and we hope you will join us. Subscribe to Almost Major wherever you get your podcasts. Now proudly a part of the Someone's Favorite Productions podcast network.
If you're looking for more horror outside of the mainstream, look no further than Unsung Horrors, a podcast about underseen horror movies. I'm Lance.
And I'm Erica. Every other week, we'll cover a horror movie with fewer than 1,000 views on Letterboxd. We'll even give you double feature recommendations to pair with the movies we discuss.
From gothic to shot on video, from slashers to comedies, from giallo to J-horror, we'll cover all the subgenres. So join us as we unearth these hidden gems of horror.
Follow us on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook, all at Unsung Horrors, available wherever you listen to podcasts. And part of the Someone's Favorite Productions podcast network.